What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, Noah Black. And today, man, our guest today, I'm really excited to have him on. He is the vocalist for the band Empty. He's incredibly talented frontman, and almost to a degree that he's so talented where he's almost a liability in every venue he goes in. You might catch him on the stage just absolutely killing it, or he's maybe hanging from the rafters of the ceiling, killing it, doing whatever. He's absolutely just amazing dude. And just wanted to just dive right into the conversation with him, man. Hailing all the way from the booming metropolis of Myrtle Beach, correct? I just want to make sure I hit that right.
Yes, sir. Myrtle Beach.
We have Gary Spears on the podcast today. So man, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, like I said at the top, man, we talked a little bit offline about, the status of Empty as a band is a little TBD right now. But however, I'm interested to kind of just talk to you based on your experience anyway, just because I know that you've had a lot of experience within the scene itself. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen a
Sure.
lot of highs and lows within it, and so I just love to be able to kind of pick your brain and get some insight on your journey and your story. But just to dive in from the beginning, right? Like, I want to tell me a little bit about your journey into music, what got you into it in the first place, and then kind of leading up to where it is now for the most part.
Sure. When I was about 13 or 14, I that was like my age where something like clicked in me and I like really was interested in like discovering like new stuff, new music, like new things to be into.
Yeah.
Um Because like I live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and like really I grew up in Conway, so like the like backwoods, bro. So like and all my brothers are like rednecks. Like I'm like the epitome of black sheep of the family. So like all I had really listened to was like country music, and like people are really big into rap music out here, even like all the rednecks.
Yeah.
So that's all I had really been like exposed to. And I was like 13 and I listened to Linkin Park for the first
Hmm.
time. And then with my own money, it was the first CD I had ever bought with my own money. I bought Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park.
Oh
And
yeah.
that changed everything for me. I was
Yeah.
like, this is what I want to do. I was like, this is so cool.
Yeah.
And then from there into high school, I had like tried to do like I knew nothing about music at all. I didn't have like any form of like lessons, like nothing. I was just kind of like figuring out how to like emulate these like vocalists that I liked. Like I was super into like I got super into like Under Oath and
Yeah.
like Silverstein and very much that like mid 2000s like post hardcore
Right.
era. That was my for sure.
Yeah.
Um and From there I tried to start these bands that like really just went nowhere. And Then coming out of high school, I was briefly in a band called Realize with Tyler from Your Spirit Dies.
Mm.
We were in like a post-hardcore, melodic hardcore-ish outfit. It wasn't good. It was not good at all. He was like the only guy. Like he's probably one of the most talented musicians I've ever met in my entire life. He just like he's one of those guys that like he can just pick up an instrument and he just gets it.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
could put something in his hands that he's never played before. I literally watched somebody put a mandolin in his hands and he was like, "Oh, oh, I get it now." He's just one of those guys. So he was like the only talented guy in that band, really. The rest of us were just kind of like
Just figuring it out.
learning from him essentially. Um, and then from there, I met Ian. He was in another band. He was in like a pop punk band at the time.
Hmm.
And we got to talking and we were both into like the same kind of like the Under Oath, Silverstein, like that kind of music. We were really into that. So we ended up quitting our projects to start what would eventually be Empty.
Hmm.
Um, and then From there that went. And that's
Yeah.
been what I was doing for the last since 2017.
Yeah. That's so dope too. Yeah. And hearing what's so funny to hear you say too is I have such a similar experience with
Yeah.
what when I knew the moment that I wanted to do any form of music was because of Linkin Park. And I actually got Meteora, which there's a whole ongoing debate about which one's better in our friend group.
Truthfully, Meteora is I think that that is
Good,
one of
good
the
answer.
best alternative records of all time. It's in my like
Yes.
three albums of all time.
Yeah, yeah. It's my favorite album of all time, even to a degree where my wife, one of the best, like most thoughtful gifts she ever got me was the 20th anniversary Meteora thing that just
That's
came out like
awesome.
last year, the year before.
Yeah,
And the whole like box vinyl, it meant the world to me. But
yeah,
it's so funny because I remember buying the CD kind of in private because like at my dad's house, he was like, you don't listen to anything other than, there was a set list of all this thing.
sure.
And I remember me and my brother listening to Meteor for the first time, and like the first scream came on, and we're like, shut it off and like poked our head out the door, like, oh, did he just hear that? We can't. But I knew listening to it once we finished the album, I'm like, I have to do music in
Yeah,
some
dude,
way.
I get that. I mean, trying to explain to my like simply Southern mom that I wanted to be like an emo kid, essentially, like that was a battle, bro.
Yeah.
Like she was not coming into Hot Topic with me. Like it was a whole thing. She did not want me to grow out my hair. I had
Yeah.
this like really, the shitty little like emo fringe. Like it was terrible. I looked
Yeah.
terrible. And I think she was trying to save me from myself, but I was, how it is.
listen, listen, I totally get it. I look back on any sort of hairstyle I had back then, and it's like it was terrible, but I loved it back then. So it fulfilled its
Yeah.
purpose.
My hair did not look good until I'm 26 now. My hair did not look good until I was like 22.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
everything I did before that was terrible.
Yeah. Listen, my hair still looks terrible now. That's why I wear hats most of the time. But you mentioned like you've got Lincoln Park. I know you mentioned a lot of other like Under Row things like that. Were what were some of the key people that especially uh whenever you had formed Empty and everything, what were some of those people that you would say influenced a lot of y'all's style together? I know it's with a band you have multiple styles that
Sure.
inspire each other, but what were some of those big things that you kind of felt inspired you or inspired the band as a whole?
Early on, we were all very much on like the same like old school, like post-hardcore. Cody, um, our original bassist Cody, he was way more into like Glassjaw, Thursday, like
Yeah.
that old school, like um and that brought another like cool layer to the table because he did write a lot of the lyrics for our first album.
Yeah.
And that added like a cool layer to like the whole like we were very on the like Under Oath, Norma Jean, like Every Time I Die kind of like wavelength. We were like,
Yeah.
we honestly just watched a bunch of like Chariot videos and we were like, we want to do that.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's
Yeah, so
yeah. And
thus began my career of just like climbing ceilings.
yeah, absolutely. That's one of the biggest things that I didn't ever unfortunately get the chance to see like you guys perform, but it felt like every time I ever saw a video that y'all were tagged in, it was you hanging from the ceiling in some form or
Yeah.
fashion.
If I
So,
could do it, then I would. There was a couple of times that got me in trouble.
yeah, yeah.
But like I was trying to be like a white Jason Butler, I guess. Because like
That's awesome.
straight up, so like, like I begged my dad to take me to Warped Tour like when I was
Uh-huh.
14 years old, and I don't remember what year this was. But the first band that opened, it was in Charlotte, and I was trying to see Hawthorne Heights. I
Mm.
had never heard of Let Live ever.
Uh-huh.
And they were like the first band that I came across that day. And the man jumped into a trash can and started crowd surfing. And I was like, I want to do that. Whatever capacity, like whatever
Whatever it
band I do,
takes.
that's crazy that thing. No way. Um, yeah, there's some videos out there you can find me of jumping in trash cans because I was really trying to channel.
That's so funny. Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, so that style, I know listening your first album, Hope and the Loss of It, right? And then kind of some of the sounds that were created from that. hearing you say that, it's I can hear a lot of those like influences and
Yeah.
stuff now. But especially once you guys shifted into the process of making Made of Fire, there was a lot of like experimentation and
Yeah.
like a lot of really unique things that I thought was so cool for like y'all style and everything like that. Was there like a was there a conversation when y'all sat down to write that album of like we want to try these new things, or was it kind of just it overflowed out of this person's idea, or what was that process like writing it?
So truthfully, that was, I think, the first time that and this is getting into like deep empty lore. That was like the first time that I would say that there was like a wedge or like a divergence in the band.
Mm,
Because there were like we were all on very different pages of
mm,
what next album should sound like. Like there were at this point, like in between albums, we didn't have Ian for a point, and we recruited Tyler from Wilt Wither, and he was a member of Empty for a
uh,
brief period.
yeah,
Um, and he, being new, he didn't have the most like he wasn't the most like vocal about what the next album should sound like or whatever.
right,
He just
yeah,
was drums on it. Um, but between the rest of the three of us, we could not at all agree on what the next album should sound like.
right, yeah,
Whether it should be like a continuation or a rehashing of what we did for Hope and the Loss of It, or it should be something entirely new. I was entirely disinterested with rehashing what I had already done.
right,
Um, I wanted to do something, and I think I might have gone a little too crazy with it, but I wanted to do something that was like so different. I just wanted to
right,
do something that like not even that was so different from what I was already doing, but I wanted to do something that was like different enough that I was like, I don't hear everybody else doing it.
right, yeah, yeah,
Um, and so that ended up with so we ended up like splitting up at that point.
mm,
I ended up recruiting Ian came back in between the album, like in between.
yeah,
And Colby came back for a period. And that was actually when he came back full time. He had toured with us. He's actually the playing guitar in the Chemist music video.
oh, gotcha,
Um,
okay,
yeah, so he was like and he stayed on guitar throughout until we kind of whatever. Um, but he came on, and from there, most of Made of Fire was really a lot of my writing with Eli, also known as Boy What. He does all those Plankton covers. I'm sure you've
that's
heard.
that's dope, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so
I
that's
didn't connect the
Eli.
dots on that, but that's dope.
Yeah, so that's Eli. He's a great dude.
Yeah,
He's also a genius when it comes to music. That man, I mean, he sits in his room and he writes music all day, every day. He does nothing else. He writes music all day, every day. Like
that's
pumps out
awesome.
multiple songs a day. So I'm glad he's getting what his recognition.
Yeah.
But he was instrumental, not only just in like Made of Fire, but also like all the way back to even like our EP. Like we recorded our first EP with him. And he produced that. He produced and co-wrote some of the songs on a lot of the songs on Hope and the Loss of It, and a bunch of the songs on Made of Fire too.
Mm,
But Made of Fire was mostly between me and Eli. For Temporary High was the first one we wrote for that. And then we did Letting Go, I Should Hate You, and a couple others. And then we worked with and then Colby and I worked with John Lundeen from Point North on the rest
oh,
of.
yeah, that's so dope. Yeah.
Yeah, working with him
That
was incredible.
yeah, yeah. And it's funny that you say, and obviously from the outside looking in, I'm sure a lot of the like what would be like conflict or tension creating it.
Hmm.
For some albums or for some bands that can like completely make an album just garbage or can make it like do whatever. But it's one of those examples of like from my perspective as a listener and art being subjective depending on the person. I found it to be like so incredibly unique because of the style that was formed out of it because it's like you said, I think from a listener's perspective to the artist, I can say there's a lot of things that you guys did with that I'd not heard before that I thought was really unique, that was really, really cool, that I've got like thrown into so many different playlists because of just found it really, really cool. And so to hear the kind of the back end of that, how like
Yeah.
the lead up is so interesting to me just as a listener itself. And so were there some like key highlights or specific songs on there that you can think back to that was like, man, I loved writing that part, or I love singing this part, or I liked
Um,
testing this thing out.
I think so. Temporary High was the very first song that I wrote for Made of Fire. And that was
Mhm.
also the first time that every time I had like worked on a song with somebody, it was always like I came up to like I was always working on it as a group or
Right.
as like a partnership, like from the get go.
Yeah.
This was my first time that I had like written down lyrics, written down like my like rough draft chord progression and like skeletoned out a song and then like brought it to Eli and said like, yo, so I wrote this. And it was like the first thing that I had really said was like, this is mine. Like I wrote this.
Wow.
I'm really happy with it. Let's make it like dope.
Yeah.
Um, and I just think like that's the one song. If I had to point out any song on either of our albums, I think that Temporary High is like just a perfect song.
Yeah.
Like there's
It's
nothing else that I
stupid
would
catchy, dude. It's
yeah.
yeah. It's
I
so
was like,
good.
this song is so catchy and like there's nothing different that I would do to it. It just like it came together so quickly and so well. And it was just one of those like moments that like it's one of those moments that like every songwriter hopes and dreams for it, how every song's gonna go where like the next part just fits into it, the next part
Yeah.
just fits into it, and everything's just like every idea that we're throwing at it just works.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Um, specifically in that song, I think I got like there's a section where like a very brief pause in the second at the end of the second verse going into the chorus where originally it was just going to do the same like kind of pre that the first verse did, but then I had the idea of like halving it to 2/4 and then adding that little like scream to create this like
Yeah.
abruptness. So because like at the time the track just seemed like it was a little like you could kind of just see everything as it was coming. Like you could see where the end of the song was at the beginning of it.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
wanted to throw in some, and that's like the fun stuff for songs for me is like when you're listening to the song and you're like, oh, I didn't expect them to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's not, and one of the big things listening through the album too, there were a couple moments where there was this like infusion of where you have almost this like there's a hip hop driving beat and you're like screaming slash like rapping almost type of situation. Like
Yeah.
it was really, really what who came up with that idea as you're coming into it? Was it already kind of there from the get go, or did it just like this feels nice? Let's just throw this in there, you know?
Yeah, so when we went to so like and this is also I think this is like a really interesting way to like look at the how Made of Fire could have been because when we went to John, the songs that we had were Temporary High, Letting Go, I Should Hate You.
Yeah.
This one song that was like a four on the floor beat that
Mhm.
I'm really mad that I never released it because it has my favorite melody I've ever written in it, maybe one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then I want to say there's one more on the album. Oh, Disconnect. We wrote Disconnect with
Oh,
Eli.
yeah, yeah.
So it was this very like going into it with that, we had no concept that we were going to do songs like Can't Trust Nobody, Close My Eyes, Made of Fire,
Right.
none of those songs, or Vicious Riches, none of those. So we were very much on this idea that we were going to do this like poppy, emo, drop A rock album.
Yeah.
Um, because that's what I was into. And that's
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
I was like, I got really into bands like I was really into like the Plot New and
Yeah.
like Dayseeker and like those very like pop heavy like
Yeah.
metalcore bands.
Yeah.
Something about that. I know like there's a lot of like people that are like true diehard like metalcore whatever that hate like
Yeah.
modern. I don't know. I
No,
like
bro,
it. I think it's
I love
cool.
it. I love it.
I think it's so cool.
Yeah.
Um but so then we get to John and John's like, I'm all and then John said this thing he was like, my big thing when it comes to songwriting is living your truth. He was like, you have to live your truth, and we got to figure out what your truth is. And then so he threw out like, I was mentioning that I was like, I really fuck with like Ghost Main, and I really love like trap hats on like metalcore songs and
Yeah.
like pads and stuff. I was like, I think that's really cool. And he
Yeah.
was like, oh, he was like, do you think you could do like a triplet scream so that it like kind of emulates like rapping?
Yeah.
And I was like, I can try. I've never
Yeah.
done such before, but I can try.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what we decided to do for Close My Eyes. Originally, it did
Yeah.
not have like that triplet pattern. Like we did like the chorus for it, and then we kind of structured out how the verse would be.
Hmm.
But yeah, then we were like, no, we got to do something like interesting. Which
Yeah.
was I think the point that I had made on that song. I was like, at the time, I wasn't interested in writing like heavy music unless it was doing something like cool or
Yeah.
different or like whatever. Like I just didn't want to write another like Hope and Loss of It album, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. No, 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 that absolutely makes sense. And the whole almost like almost gatekeeping, for lack of better words, type of mentality some people have of like a band staying exactly the same and it just being the same thing. I've always been like not as into that. Like for me, the bands that do always sound the same, it's like I just get lost at one point down to
Yeah.
where I just stop listening to them. But I mean, the bands, I mean, the Plot and You is such a great example, but then bands like Beartooth, who have went from
Yeah.
Disgusting in 2014 to The Surface now, and The Surface is one of my favorite albums. And
Yeah.
so it's like stuff like that I've always loved because then you get to see new sides of different artists, especially whenever it is a situation where they're into different types of genres, and so they
Right.
pull these other subgenres into theirs and make just something so unique to a point to where I feel like our generation is going to get to our parents or grandparents age and there's like almost not going to be genres at all just
Yeah.
because everything is just totally fused together at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I love the whole like genre fusing thing. I think like I wish I could remember what they're called, man. There's this one band and they're from Virginia and they're like a hair metal metalcore band.
Oh, that's dope.
Like the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah,
And like they dress like the fits and everything. And I'm like,
that's
no, this is
dope.
so cool.
Yeah,
Like that's so like I don't like hair metal, but I liked that.
yeah, 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 you can
Um,
respect the hustle that they're going
nah,
for
I
no
respect
matter
the
what.
hustle. Sure, it's so cool. It's
Yeah,
so cool.
that's awesome.
Um,
You,
yeah, I just don't care for like the rehashing of like shit that I've already heard like for the last 20 years.
yeah, 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 totally get that.
Or it's
And
just
so
like rinse and repeat.
right, exactly, exactly. And so you touched on, talking about the songwriting for especially a couple of the different songs. Whenever you do go to sit down and write, is it one of those for you where you kind of have a set formula? Does it fluctuate depending on kind of what you're feeling? Is it, hey, I'm going to sit down and, I'm going to write with guitar and then just kind of see what comes out of it? Or kind of what's your processes whenever you do go to sit down to write a song?
So most of my songwriting processes are one or two things. Either I'm writing out like a whole structured like instrumental for a song, or at very least like the chorus for a song, and we'd even put like production and like
Yeah.
try to come up with like a
Yeah.
feeling
Yeah.
you can hear. Um, and then that can really help like set the tone because like okay, well what does this song feel like to you?
Right.
Like does it feel like your heart's just gotten broken? Does it feel
Yeah.
like you're angry about whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And then from there, something I did differently from Hope and the Loss of It. Hope and the Loss of It, I very much like took like poems and like writings and like other like lyrics that I had from off to the side. And we would write the lyrics and then come up with melodies after the instruments were written.
Right.
For after Made of Fire, and I've always written like this since we've done that. I started doing the melodies first.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then figuring out how to convey my ideas or like feelings or whatever with the melody that I was getting. For some reason, like having like more confines around like
Yeah,
the idea itself, it gives me like better perception and like ideas for what to do for that section.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. Um, but that's normally how I would do that's normally how I do that. And then the only other thing that I would do for option B is I would do the same thing essentially where I'm like writing melodies, but I'll also like do the chord progression at the same
right. Yeah,
time.
yeah,
And then like try to come up with something in like the acoustic guitar style way of like writing a song.
yeah,
Um, and then taking that song and saying, okay, this is like the composition of the song, these are the lyrics, this is the chord progression, and then
yeah.
throwing it up and then turning it into like a bigger whatever kind of song.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And I've always I envied is a weird word for it, but it's been so funny to me. There's a couple friends of mine who they will specifically start lyrics first, no sort of like melody process, production, no sort of instrumentation and stuff. I'm like, I don't know how you do it because
Yeah, I
for
just
me,
can't do that.
yeah, I have to have some sort of like typically it's a similar like I have to have at least a general structure of what the chord progression is going to be, how the feel of the song. Most songs do start off like it's a this song feels like somebody's about to stab you in the back. So let's
Right.
write lyrics around that, you know. And so many times it's like there's so many songs that are written out of like I've not personally experienced that, but it felt like that's what the song needed, so that's what wrote on. And so it's interesting to hear that for you too. But it's always blew my mind to people that are like, I
Yeah,
just
I
wrote out a
guess
bunch
some
of
people
lyrics.
can. Yeah, I guess some people can like work. I mean, like, I think like in my mind, I can see that there's like a way to like do it the other way around.
For
But
sure.
for me, when I've written lyrics first, um, it always just like ends up in me trying to cram
Yes.
words
Yeah.
into like boxes, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I should have just made the box
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. It's like this whole tension between the melody and the lyrics. And like
Yeah,
once you
it's
start
like I could
lyrics
have.
first, it's like you're almost like you want to put whatever you're feeling or whatever in that. And it's like if you
Right.
take something out, it's like it's taking something away from the song itself.
Right. It's like, yeah, and then like I guess it maybe works if you're not a person. Like when I try to write like that, it's always just like stream of consciousness, just like
Yeah.
all the most amount of words, like a novel of words to go into this like this 16 barbers.
Yeah.
Uh
Yeah. That's hilarious.
yeah, it's just like I don't know, making the words while the box is already there instead of taking the words that you already have and trying to cram them inside of a different box is
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just feel
It's
like
just
the
easier.
for me, it's the melodies just end up being better whenever you just focus on how do I make this melody catchy or flow well, and then try and fit it in
And I
from there.
think that was one of the things I learned so much from Eli, like hanging out. Like, if you ever want to just be better at songwriting, just hang out with people that are better songwriters than
Yes,
you.
yes,
And one of the most important things I think that he taught me was that um, people don't remember lyrics; people remember melodies.
yeah, yeah,
That's the part that's catchy. The lyrics aren't catchy. The
yeah,
melody is what's catchy, and the
yeah,
way that you said the words is what's
yeah,
catchy. Um, and then from like once I started thinking about the melody being, I guess like it sounds like dumb to say, but like the melody being more important than the words themselves, it just made it just feels like it made the songwriting that part of the songwriting process way easier.
yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, and especially for people who haven't been into songwriting, who haven't been into that process, that thankfully we have people that jump in and listen that like to learn new things. I think that's such a great practical all those things that you brought up too because sometimes songwriting can seem like a daunting thing especially if you go back to you were first listening to Linkin Park for the first time and it's like
Yeah.
how do I do what they're doing right now, it can seem
Right.
overwhelming but those like practical things just end up like making it make so much more sense too and make it seem a lot more feasible to do it. And so for somebody who's maybe wanting to get into songwriting or wanting to get into, vocals, production, anything of the art of what it takes to create a song. Just in your experience, what's been some like key things that you would give advice to somebody on, or things of, hey, I want to start a band, what goes into that, anything that goes into the process, what would you say from your experience that you would give advice on?
Sure. As far as like songwriting goes, again, hang out with people that you know are good songwriters. Like if you have a friend and that friend is really good at writing songs, just be like, hey, what do you think about like working on something together? Even if
Yeah,
you don't feel like you have like a ton to like contribute, or if you can just like observe them and their process. I don't know. For me, like working with other people that were way better songwriters than me made me a better songwriter because I can take the time to analyze what they're doing.
yeah,
Um, as far as starting a band, I've always said the hardest part of starting a band is finding 3 or 4 other people that all have aligned schedules, that all
yeah,
take it just as seriously as you do. Um, that's a hard part. I feel like I see so many bands that are like not on the same page. And in
yeah,
my experiences, that's when things started to shift like downhills, when like not everybody's on the same page.
yeah,
Um, because like I feel like I hear so many bands that are like, oh, we want to tour, but our drummer can't get off of work to go do these tours or whatever. And it's like you're just not on the same page.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
okay, and
yeah,
that's fine, but you also have to like be honest with what's important to you. And it's
yeah,
okay if being in a metalcore band is not the most important thing to you,
for sure. Yeah,
but if it's not the most important thing to you and it's the most important thing to these 3 other people, then maybe
it's not the right fit.
that's not the right fit.
Yeah,
And I think that people get caught up too much in on that same point. I think people get too caught up in it being like a friendship club, essentially, where
yeah,
it's like, oh, like he's not a good fit, but we really like him and we're all friends and we don't want to hurt his feelings,
yeah,
but he's holding us back from what we want to do.
yeah,
um and you just also have to like enter into a project with people that understand that this is like a business, and that it could be transactional. It could just be that like this is not like a long-term thing for you.
yeah,
And that's okay.
yeah, yeah, 100%.
Um, and then the other thing, like for anybody who like wants to start getting into like, especially like being in a band, being in a touring band, is that everybody, including your mom, including everybody else's mom, is going to tell you to get a real job because you're not going to make any money.
Yeah,
But even being like a broke touring musician, I think that the experiences that I got from the experiences and the friendships that you make and the memories that I've gotten from those years of touring and living in a van, for people who were my best friends at the time, I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world.
yeah.
You go get a real job when you're like 42 and you hate it.
Yeah. I love that, dude. I love that so much. Yeah. And I love a big thing that, people, that a lot of them have talked about that have been touring and whatever. There's times where, they're like, man, I would really love to have the like financial stability that I would like to have. And then
So
there's some people who stopped playing in bands that are like, man, I would really love to do that. And so, a big thing for people is just the reminder of, what's important to you, especially in that time of your life. You have, obviously life is uncertain of where, you're going to
100%.
be at, however, it's like where you're at in this current stage, what's going to be the most fulfilling in your life? What's going to help you, feel like you're making a difference? And if that is, hey, I'm going to go hang out with a bunch of sweaty dudes in a van for 3 months and go tour across the world. I may not make much money, but like you said, I mean, it makes some of the best memories. And if it's, hey, I would like to, go ahead and like settle down and, do all the like get married and
100%.
get stuff, there's to each their own on whichever end of the spectrum. And so I think
100%.
for
You just
anybody out there
gotta,
where,
yeah, you just gotta evaluate like what your priorities are, and again, like what is the most important thing to you. Because
Yeah.
like at 18 years old, playing in a metalcore band with my friends and traveling up and down the country, that was the most important thing to me, and that was the most important thing to me for years and years and years and years.
Yeah.
But and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, so good. All right. So kind of as we close out first, like once again, I just want to say thank you so much for hanging out with me, chatting with me, dude. It's been fun to pick your brain, especially, we haven't had any sort of like personal, interaction apart from, through socials and stuff like that. But first, thank you. And on top of that, just for anybody that wants to stay connected with anything you have going on, and staying plugged into kind of what you have going on in your life, what's the best ways for people to stay connected to you?
Empty.Gary is my Instagram. Empty is a band, that Instagram. If I ever end up doing anything with it ever again, then that's those are the places that you'll predominantly like see me as
Yeah.
I'm living my life. I try
Yeah.
to like I've been trying to stay like a little disconnected from social media the last
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
So sometimes you need a reset.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
But yeah, also thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure and I've had a really good time.
Yeah. Yeah. And once again, man, yeah, I mean, I appreciate it a lot. And there's so much that I think from your experience, even in the like weird limbo of, am I gonna, keep doing
Yeah.
anything with it? I think it's something that's so real that, somebody listening or watching may be in a similar spot and just trying to figure out what the best, case scenario is. But no matter what you end up, kind of pursuing into the future, I'm excited to see what ends up happening, and whatever beyond that, the what you've already created through Empty and everything like that, man. It's just so solid. And so even if you're listening out there and haven't checked Empty out before, man, be sure to go and listen to both the albums. They're incredible, absolutely phenomenal albums. And so they'll still be getting at least a thousand streams off of just me alone within a year by itself. So but yeah, go check that out and keep up with everything. But yeah, man, I mean, you've got a supporter over here too. So anytime, it's an honor to have you on, man.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And man, speaking of, it's an honor, man. It's an honor for anybody out there who has spent their time listening to this podcast or watching this podcast. If you are, and be sure to like and subscribe to Creative Corner Co., powers this whole podcast. And so, thank you guys who are checking it out. And so you can stay connected to everything we have going on through there on our YouTube channel, through Apple Podcast, Spotify, and all of the technological things. You can keep up with us there. And so be sure to stay tuned for what we have coming up in the next episode. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.